not sure what is meant by those who say that the party should return to something called one-nation conservatism. As far as I can tell, by their views on European federalism, such people's creed would be better described as no-nation conservatism. The activity of the European Court, which can only ultimately be checked by amending the European Communities Act itself, is increasingly undermining our judicial system and the sovereignty of our Parliament. Proposals are being made for common European defence, proposals which Michael Portillo has roundly and rightly attacked. They, too, are a threat to national independence. But most important, of course, is the proposed single European currency, which, as John Redwood has argued, would be a major step on the way to a single European nation. The Prime Minister will have the support of all of us who wish to see these dangerous and damaging proposals resisted, and the present trends reversed as he argues Britain's case at the forthcoming Intergovernmental Council, and we look forward to a successful outcome. But vital as the issue of self-government is, it is limited government that concerns me today. For the European Union not only wishes to take away our powers, it wishes to increase its own. It wants to regulate our industries and labour markets, pontificate over our tastes, in short, to determine our lives. The Maastricht Treaty, which established a common European citizenship and greatly expanded the remit of the European Commission, shows the outlines of the bureaucratic superstate which is envisaged. And Maastricht is the beginning, not the end, of that process. Indeed, we are increasingly seeing the emergence of a whole new international political class. Some of them are politicians who failed in their own countries and so have tried their luck overseas. Some are officials who understand nothing of our British distinction between the legitimate powers of the elected and those of the unelected. Almost 50 years ago, the conservative journalist Combe Brogan wrote an incisive critique of the post-war Labour government with its arrogant bossiness and intrusive cack-handedness. He called it Our New Masters. The title is equally appropriate to the new European masters. And it's no surprise to me, as someone who always recognized the socialist destination of this Euro-federalist dream, that now the Labour Party welcomes it all so warmly. What they can't achieve in an independent, free enterprise Britain, they can hope to secure in a Euro-federalist Britain, whose people's instincts are ignored and whose parliamentary institutions are overridden. Self-government, limited government, our laws, our parliament, our freedom. These things were not easily won. And if we Conservatives explain they are now in peril, they will not be lightly surrendered. In the Reeds of Runnymede, celebrating the signing of Magna Carta, Rudyard Kipling puts it like this, and I end with two verses from his great poem. At Runnymede, oh, hear the reeds at Runnymede. You mustn't sell, delay, deny a freeman's right or liberty. It wakes the stubborn Englishry. We saw 'em roused at Runnymede. And still when mob or monarch lays too rude a hand on English ways, the whisper wakes, the shudder plays across the reeds at Runnymede. And Thames, that knows the mood of kings, and crowds and priests and such like things, rolls deep and dreadful as he brings their warning down from Runnymede.
Das Wort hat Herr Farage.
Mr. Farage has the floor.
Thank you. Look, nobody in their right minds would not agree that it was a sensible thing to do to get France and Germany together round the table to break bread with each other, to have a trade deal with each other back in the 1950s, and to work as sovereign democratic nations together for peace. All of that was absolutely right and high-minded. Sadly, the whole thing has become corrupted. Tony Blair said the EU today is no longer about peace, it is about power, and how right he was and how that power has shifted. When Kohl and Mitterrand came here representing their countries 25 years ago, it was a partnership of equals, but no longer. France is now severely diminished, trapped inside a currency, frankly, from which she can't recover, and the French voice in this relationship and in Europe is little more now, frankly, than a pipsqueak. We're living, and it's an irony, isn't it, that a project that was designed to contain German power has now given us a totally German-dominated Europe. Just look at the euro. Germany has a currency that is undervalued by 20%, a growing and massive trade surplus, and most growth in the German economy since the collapse of 2008 has indeed been in exports to other Eurozone countries, such as your very big arms sales to countries like Greece. And when we have a general election that says a country like Greece wants to change direction, well, I'm sorry, but that now must be brushed aside because the Germans don't want it. And what must count as perhaps the worst piece of public policy seen in modern Europe for half a century, when you compounded the already failing and flawed EU common asylum policy by saying to the whole world, please come to Europe, and we saw, frankly, virtually a stampede, and we learn that 80% of those that are coming are not Syrian refugees. In fact, what you've done is to open the door to young, male, economic migrants, many of whom, I have to say, behave in a rather aggressive manner, quite the opposite to what you would ever expect to see from any refugee. And yet when that failure is met by objections from countries like Hungary, their opinions are crushed. This isn't a Europe of peace, it's a Europe of division, it's a Europe of disharmony, it's a Europe that is a recipe for resentment, and yet, faced with all this failure, both of you said the same thing today. You said Europe isn't working, so we must have more Europe, more of the same failing. Well, there is, I think, a bright star on the horizon. It's called the British referendum. And given that none of you want to concede Britain the ability to take back control of our own borders, a Brexit now looks more likely than at any point in modern time, and I hope and pray that Britain voting to leave the European Union will be the beginning of the end of a project, however noble its original intentions, has gone rotten.
Ja, du setzt euch da wieder hin.
So, if he wanted to go, then he starts again.
This is self-evident from Theresa May's humiliation yesterday. From a British perspective, all we see from the EU is an inflexible intransigence. We see this reckless attitude too frequently from the EU, and not just towards the UK. We see the EU's confrontation with Italy, budget, Switzerland, capital markets, Hungary, George Soros, and Poland, judicial reform. And now the EU's poster boy, Macron, supported, it would seem, by Euro gendarmerie force armoured personnel carriers with EU flags blazoned on them, deployed against French citizens, les gilets jaunes, rising up against your bonkers climate policy. Euro gendarmerie, Euro army of oppression. Given the Eurozone's attitude to others, what confidence can we have, the UK have, in any EU assurances about the backstop? The backstop is an entirely manufactured problem. No one is going to build a border in Northern Ireland. The WTO say it is not necessary. The Taoiseach says Ireland won't build one. And my old friend Jean-Claude Juncker has said the same. If their word can be trusted, then we do not need a backstop. How dare the EU use the tragedy of Northern Ireland as leverage? The issue can be solved by modern technology and goodwill. WTO rules allow at least 10 years to find solutions while negotiating free trade. Article 50 requires any trade terms in the withdrawal agreement to be temporary, so why can we not have an end date to the backstop? I'll tell you why. Because the EU dishes out punishment beatings with the sole aim of humiliating democracy. Jean-Claude himself said there can be no democracy against EU treaties. Pause to consider whether your repeated actions against democracy across the continent make the EU, like Napoleon Bonaparte, a danger to European peace and stability. Ask yourself whether you wish to have the UK and the British people as your steadfast friends or your implacable enemies.
Mr Coburn, just for the record, that statement would have been appropriate for the last debate, but because I'm open and we want to let people be heard, we allowed you to speak.
It's very kind of you, Madam.
Indeed, thank you for that.
I think we choose what we say, do we not?
Can I just also say that personally I find the remarks around punishment beatings about the European Union to be entirely inappropriate. But again, we are a house that allows for freedom of speech.
We have political differences in different nations, Madam.
Yes, and appropriate language also helps.
We were at war for many years.
Let me move to our next.